200 elite recruits were paralyzed, the training course groaning towards catastrophic collapse. Then the janitor dropped her mop and did something that would expose a government secret buried for years, shaking the military to its very foundation. The sun beat down on the Cerberus proving grounds with the indifferent fury of a furnace blast. It bleached the packed earth to a pale tan and glinted off the sweat-slick steel of the obstacle course, a sprawling metal beast designed to chew up and spit out the toughest soldiers in the world. And in the periphery of this crucible, a ghost drifted. Her name was Elara Vance, though most of the recruits didn't know it. To them, she was just the janitor. At 30, Eli looked older, worn down by a life they couldn't imagine. Her unremarkable Umasura hair was perpetually scraped back into a loose, messy bun, strands escaping to frame a face that was pale and often smudged with dirt. She was lost inside a pair of oversized, faded gray coveralls, the kind of uniform designed to make a person invisible. She moved with a quiet, shuffling gait, pushing a wheeled cart whose squeaking axle was the only announcement of her presence. She was a fixture, as much a part of the landscape as the razor wire and the climbing ropes, and just as easily ignored. But Eli watched, while her hands methodically swept dust from the walkways or emptied trash bins. Her eyes, a startlingly sharp shade of hazel that seemed out of place in her otherwise washed-out appearance, were always fixed on the training. They weren't the vacant eyes of a bored worker. They were analytical, dissecting every movement. She saw the subtle shift in a recruit's balance on the high beams, the fractional hesitation before a leap, the inefficient grip on a rope that would cost precious seconds and energy. Her focus today was on the final, monstrous obstacle that loomed over the entire facility, the reckoning. It was a 14-foot vertical wall, sheer and intimidating, with a cruel overhang at the top. It wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a psychological weapon. It was the place where aspirations died. Eli had watched thousands of soldiers attempt to conquer it, and she knew its secrets better than anyone. She knew the precise texture of each handhold, the way the morning sun heated the eastern face, making it slick with condensation, and a specific pattern of scuff marks that revealed the most common paths of failure. A new cohort of candidates was running the course, their shouts and grunts echoing across the grounds. Eli paused her sweeping near a water station, her posture deceptively relaxed. A young, powerfully built recruit took a running start at the reckoning, his face a mask of raw determination. He launched himself upwards, finding purchase, moving with impressive speed. But as he neared the overhang, his technique faltered. His hips were too far from the wall, his core strength failing to compensate. Shift your weight to the left foot. Use the momentum from your hip rotation. Don't pull with your arms. A voice echoed in Eli's mind. It was crisp, professional, the voice of a seasoned instructor. She saw the entire sequence play out in her head, the precise angle of his body, the necessary muscle engagement, the three-move combination that would carry him over the top. But on the outside, she remained motionless, her expression blank. The recruit's grip failed. He fell back to the padded ground with a frustrated roar, smacking the wall with his fist. Eli's gaze flickered away, her cart's wheel giving a familiar squeak as she pushed it along the perimeter fence. The recruits saw a janitor. They didn't see the woman who could map the entire course in her mind, who understood the physics of every obstacle, who saw not just soldiers, but systems of muscle, bone, and will, and knew exactly how to optimize them. They saw a ghost, a nobody. And that was exactly how Colonel Elara Vance, formerly of the Nightshade Division, wanted it. For now, the air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the dry heat. Today wasn't just another training day. It was a culling. 200 of the military's finest, drawn from every elite branch, stood in rigid formation. Their uniforms were immaculate, their jaws set, their eyes fixed on the man who stood before them, as if he were carved from the same unforgiving rock as the surrounding mountains. Master Sergeant Rex Thorne was a legend, a man whose service record was as classified as the advanced weaponry he sometimes tested. He was built like a battering ram, with a face that looked like it had been in a lifelong argument with a bag of rocks. His voice, when it came, was pure gravel, a low rumble that carried across the parade ground without the need for amplification. "Listen up," Thorn barked, his eyes sweeping over the recruits, seeming to make individual contact with every single one. "You are the best of the best. You've fought in deserts and jungles. You've jumped from plains and crawled through mud. You think you're tough. Today, Cerberus will be the judge of that." He gestured towards the sprawling obstacle course. "This isn't just steel and rope. It's a filter. It's designed to find your breaking point and push you past it. Success is not guaranteed. In fact, for most of you, failure is a certainty." His lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "Your performance today determines who moves on to the next phase of selection. The clock starts when I say go. It stops when the last person crosses the finish line. Do not let your brother down. Do not let yourself down. And do not, for 1 second, think this will be easy." From her position near the control tower, Eli watched the speech, her expression unreadable. She had heard 100 speeches like it. They were all part of the ritual, the psychological priming necessary to push men and women to their absolute limits. Thorn was good. He knew how to blend threat with inspiration, how to forge a disparate group of individuals into a cohesive unit through shared adversity. "Ready?" Thorn's voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. It seemed to intensify the silence. "Go!" The word was an explosion. 200 bodies surged forward as one, the ground trembling under the impact of their combat boots. They hit the first obstacle, a series of high walls, not as a crowd, but as a disciplined wave, helping each other over, their movements economical and practiced. They flowed through the mud crawls under razor wire, emerging on the other side as unrecognizable brown figures. They swarmed the 40-foot rope climbs, their powerful arms and legs pumping in a steady rhythm. Eli began her slow, methodical circuit around the course, her wheeled cart a constant, unobtrusive presence. She watched them navigate the water obstacles, their bodies slicing through the cold, murky water. She saw the grimaces of pain, the flashes of fear, the moments of selfless teamwork as a stronger recruit gave a weaker one a boost. The air filled with the sounds of intense effort, the sharp hiss of exhaled breaths, the splash of water, the scrape of boots on metal, the constant, encouraging shouts between teammates. It was a symphony of controlled violence and human endurance, and Eli was its silent, all-seeing audience. She felt a familiar, deeply buried pang, a ghost of the woman she used to be, the commander who lived and breathed this world. But she pushed it down, her grip tightening on the handle of her broom. Her role now was to be invisible, to watch, and to wait. The recruits were performing with brutal efficiency. They moved like a pack of wolves, relentless and coordinated, devouring one obstacle after another. Master Sergeant Thorn watched from a raised platform, a rare look of grim approval on his face. They were strong, this group, maybe one of the strongest he'd seen. But Cerberus always had a way of finding a weakness. The 7th obstacle was known as the Steel Inferno. It was a complex, 50-yard network of horizontal bars, hanging rings, and suspended ladders, all dangling 20 feet above a pit of jagged rocks. It demanded not just immense upper body strength, but also flawless timing and rhythm. A single miscalculation meant a disqualifying fall. A fire team of 4 recruits was halfway across when the first sign of trouble appeared. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a subtle, high-frequency whine, a sound that cut through the grunts and shouts like a surgeon's scalpel. It came from one of the main support pylons, a thick steel column from which dozens of cables radiated. In the glass-walled control tower overlooking the course, Chief Warrant Officer Eva Rostova heard it through her headset's ambient mic. Her head snapped up for the progress monitor, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the Steel Inferno. Rostova was the opposite of Thorn. Where he was visceral instinct, she was cold, hard data. She lived by regulations and protocols. Hold! Her voice, amplified by the course-wide PA system, was sharp and absolute. All units, I say again, all units, hold your position. The command rippled through the 200 recruits. The effect was instantaneous and eerie. Motion ceased. Men and women froze in place, some hanging by one arm from a steel bar, others crouched mid-stride, their bodies coiled springs of arrested motion. All eyes turned towards the steel inferno. The high-pitched whine from the support pylon was escalating now, becoming a grating screech. A fine tremor ran through the entire structure. Eli, who had been sweeping near the base of the control tower, stopped. Her head tilted, her gaze fixed on the pylon. Her body went utterly still, but her mind was racing, processing the sound, calculating the resonant frequency, modeling the potential stress fractures. Inside the tower, technicians scrambled, their fingers flying across keyboards, trying to isolate the problem. Red warning icons began to flash across Rostova's main screen. Structural integrity warning on pylon 7 Bravo. A tech called out, his voice tight with alarm. The primary tension anchor is showing stress levels at 150% of maximum tolerance. Rostova grabbed her radio, her knuckles white. Thorn, we have a critical failure imminent at the Inferno. The entire section is unstable. Thorn was already moving, his voice a low growl over the radio. What's the protocol, Eva? Protocol is immediate evacuation of the course, she snapped back. But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Nearly 40 recruits were currently on the Steel Inferno, suspended in mid-air. A panic scramble to get off could be just as dangerous as staying put. The structure groaned again, a deep, guttural sound of tortured metal. A few small flakes of rust and paint dust drifted down from a joint near the top of the pylon. Eli watched it all, her face a mask of calm. She saw what the technicians in the tower, focused on their immediate readings, were missing. She saw the web of interconnected cables, the shared support systems, the hidden dependencies that turned a single point of failure into a potential catastrophe. The first crack had appeared, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the whole thing was about to come crashing down. The control tower, once a place of calm observation, had become a pressure cooker. The air was thick with tension and the smell of hot electronics. On the main screen, a 3D model of the obstacle course flashed angry red warnings, concentrated around the Steel Inferno, but beginning to spiderweb outwards. If that main support anchor goes, the whole section collapses, a young technician said, his voice trembling slightly. The shock load will be catastrophic. Chief Warrant Officer Rostova was a whirlwind of controlled energy, issuing orders with clipped precision. I want a full course evacuation now. Get everyone to the designated rally points. Move. Negative, Chief. Master Sergeant Thorne's voice boomed from the radio, laced with an authority that challenged her own. He was standing at the edge of the Inferno, his eyes locked on the groaning pylon. You move those recruits now, and you'll have a dozen falls before the thing even comes down. They're safer holding their positions until we can assess. Assess? Rex, there's nothing to assess. Rostova shot back, pacing in front of the monitors. Her gaze was fixed on the data, on the protocols that were screaming at her. The regulations are clear. In a code red structural failure, we evacuate. No exceptions. It's about liability. It's about procedure. This is about lives, Eva, not liability. Thorne's voice was a low snarl. Your procedure is going to get my people killed. They're trained to hold position under stress. Let them do their jobs while your eggheads figure this out. The argument raged, a battle of wills between the field commander and the safety officer. It was the classic military conflict. The rigid certainty of the rulebook versus the fluid, chaotic reality of the situation on the ground. The technicians exchanged nervous glances, caught in the crossfire. They kept calling out readings, each one worse than the last. Tension loads are propagating to the adjacent sectors. Secondary anchors on obstacles 8 and 9 are now showing yellow line stress. The vibration is causing harmonic resonance in the eastern cable array. Rostova's face was pale. The situation was spiraling out of control, expanding beyond the initial failure point. The cascading effect, was happening faster than the models predicted. Her protocol-driven mind struggled to keep up, to find the right regulation for a disaster that was writing its own rules. She was losing control, and she knew it. Thorn, on the ground, could feel the vibrations through the soles of his boots. He saw the fear in the eyes of the recruits hanging from the bars, their muscles screaming from the strain of holding static positions. His gut, honed by decades of combat, was telling him that this was no longer a training exercise. It was a combat zone, and Rostova was trying to command it from a remote bunker. "Eva, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping, trying to cut through her panic with cold reason. "We need a phased withdrawal. Get the personnel on the ground clear first, then we talk the ones on the obstacle down, one by one." "There's no time," she yelled, her composure finally cracking. "The whole eastern section is connected. Don't you understand? The models show everything could go." The storm in the control tower had reached its peak. Two experienced leaders, paralyzed by conflicting philosophies, were shouting at each other while the lives of 200 soldiers hung in the balance. The digital clock on the wall ticked down with relentless, indifferent precision. And into this vortex of chaos and indecision, a ghost quietly opened the door. Elara Vance stepped into the control tower, and for a moment, no one noticed. She was just a smudge of gray in their peripheral vision, part of the background noise. The arguments continued to rage, fueled by adrenaline and fear. "We evacuate, Thorn. That's an order." "It's the wrong order, Eva." "Excuse me," Eli said. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, and was completely swallowed by the cacophony. She took another step into the room, her worn-out sneakers making no sound on the tile floor. She looked at the main screen, her eyes scanning the complex schematics and rapidly changing data streams. She wasn't just looking, she was absorbing, processing the information with a speed that would have stunned the technicians beside her. She tried again, her voice a little louder this time, imbued with a strange, calm authority that seemed to cut through the noise. "You're looking at the wrong problem." The arguing stopped. Every head in the room turned to stare at her. It was as if a piece of furniture had suddenly started speaking. Master Sergeant Thorne's voice crackled over the radio. "Who the hell is that?" Rostova's expression was a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. You need to leave immediately." Eli ignored her. Her eyes remained locked on the screen. She pointed a slender, work-roughened finger at a specific junction point in the 3D model, a place where multiple cable arrays converged. "Your focus is on the Steel Inferno's pylon. But the critical failure point isn't the pylon itself. It's the Alpha 7 junction hub it's connected to." She walked forward, moving with an unhurried grace that was utterly at odds with the frantic energy in the room. She stood next to the lead technician, who stared at her, dumbfounded. "That hub," Eli continued, her voice steady and clear, "shares its load-bearing anchors with the entire eastern sector's tensioning system, specifically with the foundation of the reckoning." A heavy silence fell over the room. Rostova and the technicians looked from Eli to the screen, their own expert eyes now tracing the lines she had indicated. Thorn was silent on the radio, listening intently. When the Inferno's main support cable snaps, and it will in about 3 minutes, it won't just be a vertical collapse. It will create a massive whiplash effect. The shockwave will travel through the Alpha 7 hub and propagate directly to the foundation anchors of the wall. The horizontal shear stress will exceed their yield strength. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You're not just going to lose the Steel Inferno. You're going to lose the reckoning too. The entire wall is going to come down." This time, her words hit with the force of a physical blow. The lead technician frantically typed, bringing up the specific stress analysis charts for the hub. His face went white. "My God," he whispered. "She's right. The simulation confirms it. The whole damn thing is connected." Rostova stared at Eli, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of the lowly janitor with the high-level structural analysis she had just delivered. How could you possibly know that?" Eli finally turned her gaze from the screen to look at the chief warrant officer. Her hazel eyes were clear and direct, stripped of their usual vacant glaze. "Because I designed it," she said simply. "Every cable, every anchor, every single weak point. I put them there." The 3 words, "I designed it," hung in the air of the control tower, shattering the reality of everyone present. Rostova stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. The technicians stared, their hands hovering over their keyboards. Over the radio, there was only the sound of static and Master Sergeant Thorne's sharp, indrawn breath. Eli didn't wait for them to process the revelation. She turned back to the screen, her focus absolute. "Your models are lagging. The harmonic resonance is accelerating the metal fatigue. You don't have 3 minutes anymore. You have less than 2. Without another word, she turned and walked towards the door. Her movements were no longer the shuffling gait of a weary janitor. They were economical, purposeful, the movements of a soldier with a clear objective. "Where are you going?" Rostova demanded, finding her voice. "To fix it," Eli said over her shoulder, and then she was gone, leaving a wake of stunned silence behind her. Outside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Instructors were shouting orders, trying to maintain discipline among the terrified recruits. The screeching from the steel inferno had become a constant, high-pitched scream, the death cry of failing metal. Eli walked directly into this chaos, but she seemed to exist in a bubble of profound calm. She didn't run. Her pace was brisk, deliberate, a straight line through the scattering personnel. Her walk was a study in contrasts. Her flimsy, oversized coveralls flapped around her slender frame. Her worn sneakers padded softly on the dirt. She looked utterly out of place, a civilian wandering into a war zone. Yet, there was an undeniable authority in her bearing. Recruits and instructors alike found their eyes drawn to her, this small, unassuming woman striding towards the epicenter of the danger. Thorne saw her emerge from the control tower and start across the field. His mind was still reeling from her claim. "I designed it. It was impossible." The designer of the Cerberus course was a classified legend, a ghost in the machine. But as he watched her move, a primal instinct, the part of him that could recognize a true operator under any disguise, began to scream at him that she was telling the truth. He saw the way she navigated the terrain, the way her eyes were already scanning the reckoning, not with fear, but with the critical gaze of a creator inspecting their flawed handiwork. "All units, hold fast," he barked in his radio, his decision made. He was betting on the ghost. "Keep your eyes on the janitor." The message, bizarre as it was, rippled through the ranks. 200 pairs of eyes shifted their focus from the failing steel inferno to the lone figure of Elara Vance. They watched as she walked past the base of the inferno without a sideways glance, even as a shower of bolts and metal shards rained down a few yards away. They watched as she approached the base of the reckoning, the 14-foot wall that was, according to her, a ticking time bomb. The world seemed to shrink, the chaos to fade, until there was only the wall, the woman, and the 200 soldiers who had become the unwilling audience to a drama they couldn't possibly comprehend. Eli reached the base of the reckoning and stopped. For a moment, she simply stood there, her head tilted back, studying the sheer face of the wall as if it were a complex map. To the others, it was a monolithic slab of concrete and steel. To her, it was a network of familiar routes, stress points, and hidden possibilities. She could feel the vibrations from the failing inferno traveling through the ground, a low hum that resonated in the soles of her sneakers. The wall was alive, and it was dying. An instructor, a young sergeant named Hayes, ran towards her, his face etched with panic. "Ma'am, you have to get away from there. The whole thing is unstable. We're expecting a total collapse." Eli didn't look at him. She seemed completely absorbed by the wall. She reached into the deep pocket of her coveralls, her movements unhurried. The onlookers expected a tool, perhaps a radio. Instead, she pulled out a simple strip of dark, well-worn cloth. It might have been torn from an old t-shirt. Then she did something that defied all logic, something that tipped the scene from a crisis into the realm of the surreal. She lifted the strip of cloth to her face and, with practiced efficiency, tied it firmly around her eyes, covering them completely. She knotted it securely at the back of her head, plunging her world into absolute darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the 200 recruits. On the radio, Thorne's voice was a choked whisper. What the hell is she doing? The act was so bizarre, so utterly insane in the context of the situation, that it created a pocket of absolute silence. The constant screech of the failing steel seemed to fade into the background. The panicked shouts of the instructors died in their throats. Every person on that field, from the rawest recruit to the most seasoned officer, was captivated by the sight of the small, unassuming janitor blindfolding herself at the foot of a collapsing 14-foot wall. It was an act of supreme, almost arrogant confidence. Or it was the act of a madwoman. There was no middle ground. In the control tower, Rostova stared at the monitor showing the live feed from the camera at the base of the wall. She watched the close-up of Eli adjusting the blindfold, her expression unreadable. Run a psych profile, she muttered to no one in particular. Vance, Elara, find me everything you can. But on the field, there was no time for analysis. There was only the visceral, heart-stopping reality of the moment. The blindfold was a declaration. It was a statement that in the world she came from, sight was a luxury, not a necessity. It was a signal that the rules of normal human limitation no longer applied. Eli took a deep, centering breath. She raised her hands, palms facing the wall, not quite touching it, as if sensing its energy. The vibrations were stronger now. The hum had become a growl. She had seconds left. The ghost was about to perform an act of resurrection, and she was going to do it blind. The moment after Eli secured the blindfold, she exploded into motion. There was no hesitation, no tentative search for a hold. She took 3 lightning-fast steps and launched herself at the wall. Her ascent wasn't a climb. It was a form of vertical dance, a fluid, unbroken sequence of movements that seemed to ignore the laws of gravity. From his position on the ground, Master Sergeant Thorne watched, his jaw slack with disbelief. He had seen thousands of elite soldiers climb this wall. They used power, grit, and raw strength. They fought the wall, conquering it through brute force. Eli wasn't fighting the wall. She was flowing with it. Her small, slender hands shot out, finding holds that seemed invisible, holds that weren't even part of the standard climbing routes. Her feet, clad in flimsy sneakers, found tiny, dime-sized ledges with unerring precision. She moved with an impossible combination of speed and grace, her body a seamless extension of her will. Specialist Kaido Tanaka was one of the recruits clinging to the wall's surface, his muscles screaming in protest. He had a direct, terrifying view of the ascent. He saw Eli move past him like a wraith. He saw her fingers brush over the concrete, reading its texture like braille, her movements guided by an internal sense he couldn't fathom. The route she took was insane. It traversed a section of the wall that was considered unclimbable, a sheer face with almost no viable holds. Yet, she moved across it as if on a horizontal ladder, her body perfectly balanced, her energy expenditure minimal. It wasn't human. It was something else entirely. He felt a primal, all mixed with a new kind of fear, not of the collapsing wall, but of the woman climbing it. In the control tower, Rostova and her team watched on the main monitor, the camera struggling to keep up with Eli's speed. That's impossible, the lead technician whispered, pointing at the screen. The holds she's using, they aren't on the official schematics. They're maintenance anchor points, recessed and covered. There's no way she could know they're there, let alone use them blind. She knows, Rostova said, her voice barely audible. She knows because she put them there. The realization dawned on her with sickening clarity. This wasn't just a climb. It was a system diagnostic performed by its creator under catastrophic failure conditions. The true test came at the overhang. This was where nearly every climber faltered. It required a full commitment of strength, forcing the body out and away from the wall. Most recruits had to pause, to gather themselves before the final, desperate push. Eli never broke rhythm. As she reached the overhang, her body coiled and then flowed upwards and over it in a single, breathtaking motion. It was a move that defied physics, a maneuver so complex and perfectly executed that it looked like a special effect. She didn't pull herself over. She seemed to simply levitate, her hands and feet finding their marks with supernatural certainty. In less than 30 seconds from the moment she left the ground, she was standing on top of the platform, 14 feet in the air. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and heavy with disbelief. 200 elite soldiers, men and women at the peak of human conditioning, stared up at the small figure in gray coveralls. The blindfold was still in place, a stark black line against the bright sky. The janitor had not just climbed the reckoning. She had humiliated it. She had broken it. And she had done it blind. Standing atop the wall, Eli reached up and untied the blindfold with a single, fluid motion. She shook her head, letting her Yamasura hair fall free, and looked down at the sea of stunned faces. The wind whipped at her oversized coveralls. For the first time, she didn't look like a ghost. She looked like a commander surveying a battlefield. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the quiet murmur of a janitor. It was the clear, commanding voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life or death situations. It cut through the stunned silence with effortless authority. You have approximately 90 seconds before the primary foundation anchors fail, she called down, her voice carrying easily across the grounds. When they go, the wall will shear 18 inches to the east before the secondary fail-safes engage. Anyone still on the face needs to move to the eastern anchor cluster, positions 7 through 12. Those are the only holds that will remain stable through the shockwave. Her instructions were so specific, so confident, that they broke the spell of disbelief. The recruits, still clinging to the wall, including Specialist Tanaka, scrambled to follow her orders, their survival instincts overriding their confusion. Master Sergeant Thorne had reached the base of the wall, his radio crackling with frantic updates from the control tower confirming Eli's every prediction. He stared up at her, his mind a whirlwind of questions. "How did you do that?" he yelled, his voice rough with emotion. "That route you just took, it doesn't exist." A small, enigmatic smile touched Eli's lips. "It exists if you know where to look," she called back. Then, the first shard of truth fell. "I know where to look because I designed it. All of it." Before Thorne could even begin to process the implications, the sound they had all been dreading ripped across the sky. With a deafening crack like a bolt of lightning, the main support cable on the steel inferno snapped. The entire structure buckled and collapsed in on itself with a hellish shriek of twisting metal, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. Just as Eli had predicted, a visible shockwave radiated through the interconnected cables. The ground beneath the reckoning shuddered violently. The massive wall groaned and then, with a deafening roar, it shifted, lurching sideways with incredible force. The recruits who had followed Eli's instructions held on for dear life. The hold she had designated remaining firm while other parts of the wall face crumbled and broke away. She had saved them. As emergency crews swarmed the course, Eli began her descent, moving with the same impossible, blindfolded grace down the now stable eastern face. When she reached the ground, she was immediately surrounded by a circle of instructors and officers, their faces a mixture of awe, suspicion, and raw confusion. Thorne stepped forward, his command presence fully intact, but now tempered with a deep, burning curiosity. "You're not a janitor." It wasn't a question. "Not originally," Eli replied calmly, brushing dust from her coveralls. "You said you designed this course," Thorne pressed, his eyes boring into hers. "The designer is listed as Project Nightshade. It's classified above top secret." "That's correct," she said. A young lieutenant pushed forward, his expression skeptical. Project Nightshade was led by a full-bird colonel, a decorated special operations legend. "You're telling us you're a colonel?" Eli's gaze met his, and for a second, the lieutenant felt the full weight of her authority, a pressure that made him unconsciously straighten his spine. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, hard fact. "I am Colonel Elara Vance," she said, her voice dropping, each word a hammer blow of revelation. "Former commander, Nightshade Division." The name landed like a bomb. Nightshade Division, a unit so secret it was officially a myth, a ghost story soldiers told each other in hushed tones. They were the elite of the elite, operators who undertook missions that never happened, who died deaths that were never recorded. They were the government's invisible scalpel, and one of them, their commander, had been mopping floors at Cerberus for the past year. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same. The immediate crisis was over, but a new one of identity and protocol, had just begun. The revelation of Nightshade Division had created a new kind of shockwave, one that rippled through the command structure with quiet intensity. Eli stood calmly amidst the circle of officers, the eye of a hurricane of questions. Thorne was the one who finally voiced the most obvious one. Nightshade Division was officially decommissioned. The records were sealed. Restructured, not decommissioned. Eli corrected him, her tone matter of fact. Personnel were reassigned. Some of us were given unconventional roles. My identity was compromised during my last official operation. I was ghosted. The maintenance position here was a way to maintain operational security while allowing me to keep an eye on the program, to make sure the course was performing as intended. Her explanation was simple, yet it spoke of a world of sacrifice and shadow that none of them could truly comprehend. To go from a decorated colonel leading the most elite unit on the planet to a life of invisible, thankless service was a choice of profound dedication. As the highest-ranking officers began to cordon off the area, preparing for the inevitable arrival of top-level command, Specialist Kaido Tanaka approached Eli cautiously. He had been one of the recruits on the wall, and his face was still pale with shock, but his eyes burned with a fierce, intellectual curiosity. He snapped to attention, offering a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Thank you. You saved our lives up there." Eli's expression softened slightly. She returned a casual, almost lazy salute. "You would have adapted, Specialist. You're trained for it." "Not like that," Tanaka insisted. "That technique, the blindfolded ascent, it wasn't just a climb. It was something else." "Is it a Nightshade technique?" Eli studied him for a long moment, her analytical gaze assessing him. She saw not just a grateful soldier, but a mind that was already trying to deconstruct what it had witnessed. "It is," she said finally. "It's a methodology we called environmental integration. It relies on spatial memory, enhanced tactile feedback, and kinesthetic mapping. The theory is simple. An operator who doesn't depend on sight can't be blinded. They can operate in any environment, under any conditions." "Could it be taught?" Tanaka asked, the question bursting out of him. "The basics could be," Eli conceded. "But mastery is another matter. It takes years to develop the neural pathways." Nightshade candidates spent thousands of hours in sensory deprivation training just to learn to see without their eyes. It requires a level of mental discipline most people can't sustain. Her words painted a picture of training so intense it bordered on torture, a complete rewiring of the human senses. It explained the impossible feat they had all just witnessed. It was not magic. It was the result of a lifetime of dedication to a craft that no one was supposed to know existed. The wail of sirens in the distance signaled the approach of official vehicles. The storm had passed, but the cleanup was just beginning. Eli knew her time as a ghost was over. By stepping out of the shadows to save 200 lives, she had irrevocably compromised her cover. The consequences would be swift and far-reaching. But as she looked at the earnest, determined face of Specialist Tanaka, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The stirring of a purpose beyond just watching and waiting. The vehicles that arrived were not standard military police cruisers or ambulances. They were unmarked black SUVs that moved with an unnerving speed and silence. They parked in a precise, disciplined formation, and from them emerged men in crisp, unadorned uniforms that spoke of an authority far beyond that of a typical base commander. Leading them was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His uniform bore the single, unadorned star of a brigadier general, but his bearing suggested he was accustomed to wielding far more power than his rank implied. He walked directly towards the circle of officers surrounding Eli, and they parted before him like the sea. He ignored everyone else, his gaze locking directly onto Eli. He didn't seem to see the dirt-smudged coveralls or the disheveled hair. He saw the soldier beneath. "Colonel Vance," he said, his voice a calm, deep baritone. The use of her former rank sent a final, definitive shock through the assembled personnel. It was official. The ghost had a name, and a rank that commanded absolute respect. Eli straightened, her body snapping into a parade rest posture that was so ingrained it was instinctual. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. In one moment, she was the janitor. In the next, she was a full-bird colonel addressing a superior officer. "General Sterling," she replied, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I apologize for the breach of operational security. The situation was untenable." General Marcus Sterling stopped a few feet from her. A faint, unreadable smile played on his lips. "At ease, Colonel. We're not here to court-martial you for saving 200 lives. We're here because you've created a very interesting opportunity." He turned his gaze from Eli to Master Sergeant Thorne, and then to the awestruck recruits who were being kept at a distance. For years, the official position has been that the capabilities of Nightshade Division were too specialized, too extreme, to be replicated. The program was deemed unsustainable. Its assets were scattered. Sterling's eyes returned to Eli. "You, however, have just provided a rather dramatic field demonstration proving that the core methodologies are not only viable, but life-saving. You've also proven that they can be retained, even in a state of deep cover." The implication was clear. This wasn't about a disciplinary hearing. It was about a resurrection. "Your cover is blown, Colonel," Sterling continued. "Your value as a clandestine observer is now zero. But your value as an instructor, as a living repository of Nightshade doctrine, has just gone through the roof." He gestured vaguely towards the damaged course and the new training facilities being constructed on the far side of the base. "The nature of warfare is changing. We need operators with capabilities that go beyond kicking down doors. We need soldiers who can think and perceive in 3 dimensions, who can operate in environments where technology fails them. We need ghosts." He looked directly at Eli, his expression now serious, a clear offer in his eyes. The decision was made to let Nightshade fade into myth. After today, I'm beginning to think that was a mistake. I'm here to correct it. The question is, Colonel, are you willing to step out of the shadows for good and help me build something new from the ashes of the old? The power had shifted. The arrival of command wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Elara Vance, the janitor, was being officially recalled to life, offered a chance not just to reclaim her identity, but to forge a new legacy. 6 months later, the Cerberus Proving Grounds was transformed. Tucked away in a high-security sector of the base was a new, state-of-the-art building known only as the Special Capabilities Development Center. It was a place that didn't officially exist, a school for ghosts run by a ghost. Inside, Colonel Elara Vance stood, watching a dozen of the military's most promising soldiers. They were the inaugural class of the new program, handpicked from the 200 who had witnessed the incident 6 months prior. Among them, his movements showing a natural aptitude that set him apart, was Specialist Kaido Tanaka. They were on a scaled-down, indoor version of the Reckoning, and they were all blindfolded. Eli watched them struggle, her expression a mixture of stern instruction and quiet pride. She was no longer the invisible janitor. She wore the crisp, functional uniform of an instructor, her hair now cut in a severe, practical style. The haunted, weary look in her eyes had been replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. She was back where she belonged. "Tanaka," she called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous training hall. "You're relying on muscle memory. That's good, but it's not enough. I want you to feel the wall. Use the texture of the holds to confirm your position. Your skin knows the route. Trust it. Tanaka paused his ascent, his chest heaving. He nodded, and when he resumed climbing, his movements were slower, more deliberate, his fingers seeming to read the surface of the wall. The program was brutal, pushing the candidates to the very edge of their physical and psychological limits. It was a curriculum built from the ashes of Nightshade Division, a fusion of intense sensory deprivation, advanced spatial awareness drills, and the kind of mental conditioning that could rewire a human brain. General Sterling had been true to his word, giving Eli the resources and autonomy to build the next generation of elite operators. The news of the Cerberus incident had become a legend, a highly classified story whispered among special forces. It was the story of the day the janitor climbed the wall blindfolded and changed everything. It had become a source of inspiration, a testament to the idea that extraordinary capabilities could be hidden in the most ordinary of packages. That evening, Eli stood alone in her office, looking out the window at the original reckoning wall, now fully repaired and bathed in the light of the setting sun. Her journey from a ghost in the shadows back to a commander in the light had been jarring, but she had found a new mission, not just to execute operations, but to pass on a legacy, to ensure that the unique skills of Nightshade were not lost to history. Her radio crackled to life. It was General Sterling. Elara, we have a situation. A high-value target is being held in a subterranean complex in a non-permissive environment. Zero visibility, complex layout. Conventional teams can't touch it. It's a mission for a ghost. He paused. Are any of you new class ready? Eli looked back towards the training hall, where the lights still burned brightly. Her students were young, still learning. But they were the future. They were the new dawn. They're learning to see in the dark, General, she replied, a hint of a smile in her voice. I think it's time we show them what's out there. Elara Vance's journey from janitor back to colonel was complete, but the true test for her and her new generation of soldiers had just begun. What do you think is the most impressive part of her skill? And what kind of responsibilities come with such extraordinary abilities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please be respectful to everyone's opinion. If you're moved by this story, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Comment respect?